Welcome. Welcome, everyone. It's Angelo Robles, and welcome to At Family Office. And for my members of my private community, SFO Continuity, a special welcome. I have a great show today. I've been looking forward to this guest for a long time. I have many travels in Europe. You wouldn't believe it, but I do. And one of my European relationships, a incredible direct family member, introduced me to this fine gentleman, our special guest today, who's joining us from Europe and is really a global thinker and traveler. And we have so much to uncover. Pardon a little bit of maybe the clickbaitiness of my title. It's much deeper than that. But the Sovereign Playbook, how the world's most sophisticated families are quietly outmaneuvering a potential coming collapse. We're going to have a guest today that understands from family dynamics and governance, from experience, who travels the world. There's so much going on from a geopolitical perspective, and his insights into how to hedge risk, the value of connections, control within banks and insurance companies, and even the rise of AI and so many different factors, because he has deep VC experiences as well. On that note, joining us from Europe, I'd like to welcome David Moscato, formerly many different things: entrepreneur, generational family member, deep thinker, and officially managing partner at Quarantia Capital Advisory. David, welcome to the show.
Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Pleasure to be here. Thank you, Angelo, for this invitation. It's my pleasure to be today here.
Thank you, David. The pleasure is all ours. You're a wonderful thinker, and I look forward to you sharing your insight to my audience and me being curious with hopefully some good questions that the audience could feel free to engage in as well. Why don't we begin? So, your family, I could really state every family because we go back, about 10,000 generations. But let's be a little focused on you. Your family has survived multiple regime changes in Europe over decades, hundreds of years and longer, wars, economic collapse across generations. What's the single most important lesson that perhaps has been passed down to you? Not as much philosophy, but if you want to go that route, maybe more so as operational instruction.
I believe liquidity is dignity as the core instructions. And it's not a slogan, it's a rule book. Practically, it means never let all your reserves sit inside the same political or banking system. Always have off-grid liquidity that can keep the family functioning for months if the main system jams. It also means you accept that you will often be early. You move money, change banks, or shift jurisdiction before others see the needs. And you accept to carry the cost of this price of autonomy. Liquidity buys time. Time buys negotiation power with both states and counterparty. And that negotiation power is that preserves self-respect and when everything else is up for discussion.
Well, I think that segues pretty well in terms of banking, liquid investments, and liquidity broadly. Liquidity is, we never think about it, I guess, until we really, really need it. And I could argue, what does liquidity mean if it's in banks and institutions? That is not per se direct immediate access like cash in your house or Bitcoin, all things we'll get to. Let me ask it this way, David. European noble families watched the Industrial Revolution dissolve the foundation of their power, meaning, from my perspective, land onto something more invisible and abstract. Financial instruments, paper, promises. How do you see families of wealth navigate the psychological and practical shift over those decades to centuries, even in Europe? And what did it maybe lose in translation?
Well, I take a step back. So let's say that land anchored identity. So you could walk on it, farm it, defend it. Your status was visible in hectares or acres in US and tenants. As the wealth immigrated into operating businesses and then into security and funds, we gained flexibility and scalability, but lost the visual certainty of this is mine. In the old world, risk was weather, war, and harvest. In the new world, it's basis risk, counterparty risk, regulatory risk, reinterpretations, settlement risk. So the adaptation was gradual. We use land to fund businesses. Then we use businesses proceed to buy diversified financial exposure. But psychologically, it requires a shift from instinct to governance. Lawyers, auditors, risk committee, replacing the simple intuitions of a landowner.
So I think back to, there's so many different dynasties in Europe. One when I was there last that I interviewed, the Habsburgs, but looking at the Romanovs, the kulaks, Weimar, bourgeoisie, all had warning signs of problems upcoming. I think even back to the French and Russian Revolution, which are some of the names I brought up. Warning signs that they chose not to see because the cost of seeing them was too high. What warning sign is your generation? So let's take it into right now. What warning sign is your generation choosing not to see right now?
We treat the institutional stability in developed democracy as if we were a law of nature instead of temporary political arrangement. Fiscal stress, aging populations, and polarization are tightening constraints slowly. More reporting, more temporary measures, more conditions attached to mobility and capital. History rarely announces collapse with a drum roll. It arrives as a consequence of small frictions that people normalize. Capital controls frame as anti-crime measures, travel restrictions frame as safety, financial surveillance frame as transparency. The warning sign we are ignoring is the progressive normalization of restrictions on movement of people, of money, of ideas, justified by increasingly broad emergency. So this is the biggest, I would say, sign we are facing and ignoring at the same time.
I think that's excellent because, like you said, these are things that people actually do see. They elect to ignore it because it adds complexity and cost and some level of disturbance to their lives. But those are all things, when you mention freedom of movement, as someone who prizes a level of freedom, that's an important aspect of what wealth and resources would provide. And not being in a country where I feel I have that and needing to keep my options open. But if I can't get to those options, it does make it complex. There's a difference between old money that just kind of survives to old money that thrived across centuries. What separates these two outcomes, barely surviving, if at all, to thriving, in your experience with dynastic, maybe more European families?
I would say survivors cling to what they know and preserve it. Thrivers re-underwrite their own legacy every generation. The families that thrive moved on time into industry during industrializations, into finance when capital markets became central, into global networks as empires fractured. They were willing to sell ancestral land, to buy factories, to sell factories, to build banks, to trade local prestige for global relevance. Above all, they treated the family balance sheet as dynamic problem, not as museum exhibit. Sentimental follow strategy, not the other way around, I would say.
So, how could describing sovereign risk is really no longer an emerging market problem, but kind of a universal condition for really anyone around the world? At what moment did you personally stop treating it as more of an abstract geopolitical concept and started to treat sovereign risk, what could go wrong in my own country, my own domicile, as more an operational reality? And how do you incorporate that? And what steps do you take in your ability to mitigate it?
The shift happened when I saw perfectly solvent banks unable to execute simple transactions without speaking about going to bankruptcy, but because policy change. That's when I understood sovereign risk as frictions and veto power, not just default and revolution. It shows up sudden documentation demands, unexplained delays, changing interpretation of KYC, ML rules, and escalated temporary restrictions. Once you see that, you stop asking, is the state stable? And start asking, how often does this state change the rules? And how much discretion does it give itself in the crisis? So that's, I think, it's a starting point.
And David, how do you yourself maybe look at jurisdictional optionality in terms of you could use yourself, a clientele, a relationship that you have. If you want to make it fictitious, fine. If you don't mind sharing, what do you look at when you look to have a domicile that you call your tax base and maybe optionality in other locations? If it's only multiple in Europe, then aren't you limited just to Europe? Do you look at other parts of the world as well?
I think I look at, let's put it this way, I look at how the rule of law behaves under stress, not in the marketed brochures, or even speaking with the different lawyers that I know around the world. Key filters for me are the following questions. So I put a sort of kind of questionnaire. Does the judiciary have a track record of independence when the executive is under pressure? How did the jurisdictions treat foreign capital and minorities in past crises? And what is the debt trajectory and likely political response when fiscal math stop working? Another question that I ask is about how easy is it legally and practically to move capital out, not just in. Only after that do I look at the tax rate and lifestyle. Low tax with arbitrary power is a trap. And we see many issues, even you just touched base a bit before, maybe longer later, about UAE, but I will remember in the last 10 years, UAE was blacklisted here in Europe at least 4 or 5 times that I remember on the top of my head. So meaning that transfers of bank transfer from UAE in and out to Europe, they were considered with high level risk, and sometimes they were blocked. So just to mention some small example.
When I look and I travel around the world, and I've broadly been an advocate in your backyard of Switzerland, I think it has a history and a culture where privacy and discretion is a perfect no, and that's a problem in today's world. Did it buckle to some U.S. pressures going back to 2008? Yes. Was Credit Suisse a problem? Yes. Does it report to the common reporting standard? So it does. So there is no one perfect destination, but I still look at it as something that to me is attractive. If you had to go a little quickly, Switzerland, Monaco, and then let's change the geography, Singapore, New Zealand, how do you compare and contrast?
First of all, you touch Switzerland, which is very sensitive, and also one of competitors of us. Us means I'm based in Luxembourg, so in Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. So where we are the #1 fund sector in Europe, and second the world only to the United States. Funny things now, going back to Switzerland, I remember a job interview, I think it was in 2002 or something like that, with the Swiss oldest private bank. You might remember, it's called Wegelin & Co., founded in 1741. And I remember we didn't go ahead with the interview because they face an issue that then it becomes basically the collapse of this bank. And you might remember this bank because I think it was in the Federal Court of New York between 2002 and 2010. They declared that they hide more than 1.2 billion of American assets, so American citizens. So that's one example about historical bank, 1741, that disappear. And this was basically the what triggered FATCA. FATCA was triggered by this collapse about this Swiss bank that was hiding money from undeclared funds from US IRS. So just to say about, a bit story about Switzerland. Now, although we start on the negative side, but now going to the positive side. So Switzerland historically is the banking countries in terms of being perceived as solid, and although we see also collapse of big bank like Credit Suisse. And also, if I'm speaking about from the capital market point of view, it was very weird, the collapse of Credit Suisse, because of the protections, which if we look about most of the European regulatory framework in every country, there is higher protections for from bondholders rather than equity holders. I mean, vice versa. It was the highest protection for equity holders rather than bondholders, which is usually it's not the case. So that that most any kind of jurisdictions, equity holder are the one that pay for the default of the company, and the bondholder has some certain level of protections, at least from on the court in terms of procedure. And in the case of Credit Suisse, was not like that, but that was an interesting case because of the Arabs link to that, geopolitical situations also in that case, I would say. Who is the major equity holders of the bank, that, understand the story behind it. But now going back to the avoid speculations, yes, Switzerland is considered one of the most stable countries for where to place your health, although Luxembourg is considered now probably more solid, although heavily regulated. Well, also Switzerland, but we are also part of the European Union. Then we have to pay higher price to comply with the higher regulations. But sometimes also it's over regulations, we say, which doesn't allow you to move too much. And some people are afraid about over-regulating, which some extent I can agree with that. But still, you want to be protected, so it's a price to pay some extent in some situations. Well, other countries, you saw there was a trendy at the moment, especially from US. There was, I think, in the last 3 to 5 years, a huge increase of set up family office, mostly in Abu Dhabi, and you see Ray Dalio and many others famous one. They set up operations in Abu Dhabi. Okay, the Middle East is interesting for different reasons. But do they have really a financial sector? Well, they are in the first stage. They are still expanding. I mean, they don't have even pensions funds. They don't have this kind of pension product or instruments where people can invest for in terms of retail. So the market is still on the early stage, but of course there is potentials on different angles for different projects, especially in private equity real estate. Just to say about Monaco, it's just about lifestyle, not about where to put your money. I mean, the things changed already in 2015 with full disclosure from the tax point of view among the European Union. So there's no place to hide like it was in Monaco in the past. So everything changed. And so now, if you combine different factors, probably Switzerland remain in Europe the one of the most favorite. Although Luxembourg is competing very tight because we have a different toolbox that we can create. Okay, lifestyle is still not the same, but still we have a law about family office. It was enacted in 2017, and it was although the tax change for European, so it's more attractive for country from owners from families outside European Union, but it's attracting quite a lot these days, especially immigration from UK. We saw recently with the change of the taxations in UK, which open different options where to move your residence among Europe. Okay, Luxembourg it was chosen as a country where to put your assets because the AAA rating from from the three different rating agency. So it's probably the most safe place where to put the money. And then a family from London moved to Italy or other Switzerland or other Greece, some in Portugal, some to UAE. But this was the trend. Italy make a special law. It was a law enacted in 2017 because you can remember that Cristiano Ronaldo went to play football went to play with the Juventus football teams. So they were trying to make an incentives, and this incentive was about this law that by the time you pay 100,000 euro, it's a flat tax, and then all the money that you declare, so meaning all the sponsorship and so forth outside Italy, it will not be considered taxable. So meaning that you can leave your assets in Luxembourg for producing your funds, and then basically being taxed and living lifestyles in Italy, for example. And some other jurisdictions the same. I think Geneva, for example, is 400,000 Swiss franc, and some other Swiss canton has the same flat tax. But although they changed the policy in that respect, there are not many cantons like in the past. In the past, it was really easy in Switzerland. Now they put some limit also there. So
of course,
just to say, yeah.
A topic I'm very interested in, we had David L'Esperance on a couple of weeks ago. Those of you could go back on my @Family Office on YouTube, where we go around the world and looking at sovereign optionality, for lack of a better word. You mentioned from a safety and a respect for traditions, for business, for banking, and for tax advantages to a degree, Switzerland and Luxembourg. And Italy, of course, is beautiful, does have the tax holiday, but certain countries, the UK, France, Germany, and others, are tax. So could the opportunity of moving to something like Italy, getting the, 300 lira, the tax, quote unquote, or euros, the tax holiday, but I still want to set up my business interest holding company and family office in something like Luxembourg. I had one of your country colleagues on about a year ago where we did a very deep and technical dive into that, but maybe explain to a lot of my listeners in America and around that setting up, even if it's a satellite family office in Luxembourg, provides a level of value. Explain a little more context as to why.
Well, first of all, we have a full infrastructure. So when you create your family office, which is basically set up by specific law, so it's not about setting up just a legal entity, which, by the way, you can set up. Also, suggest some families, they ask me to exit from their primary business, and for example, some entrepreneur in Italy that sell their business, really manufacturing business, and then they get this liquidity, and they don't want to park liquidity among Italian banks. And I would say I agree with that, and because my father lost quite good money with Banco Abruzzano in the past, so now the bank put the threshold about 100,000 euros protection, but when you have millions, it's not. In the past, even didn't exist that. But we saw the story about this chairman of Banco Abruzzano that was hanged, and the breach of Blackfriars in London in 1882, I think it was. Anyway, it was a story for my family because they lost money with banks, and we see banks collapse. But going back to the Luxembourg, there is really an infrastructure base here because the banks are very solid. But even that, because there was also here an issue about banking during the financial crisis. Actually, Luxembourg, by the time, it was a place where people come to buy banks. By the time,
we're going to get to that. Trust me.
But going back to the question, there is a full infrastructure available from the legal point of view. And from the tax point of view, for example, the family office here have call it lump sum amount of tax, which basically is 0.25%. So there's a tax incentive on one side, and on the other side is robust. So you are not in offshore jurisdictions like I don't know, BVI or some other Aruba or Turks and Caicos or whatsoever. Even Cayman, to some extent, is sometimes put in the gray list and black list and white list, and even there's high scrutiny from the banking from transaction through Cayman funds as well. So we have a variety of toolbox. So how we can manage wealth and with different kind of assets. You want to invest in security, we have the dedicated structure, especially the family office benefit from this low taxation if you invest in security. Outside that, we have different type of setup alternative funds, which give you basically the toolbox, and you can segregate even inside the funds different type of investments. Or you can have also friends and family that would invest only in a specific asset class. You can segregate these into a specific compartment. So sort of compartmentalization of the funds. So this is something that is well structured, meaning that in case of enforceable by the court or issue and so forth, it will be not spillover liability among different type of investment. So let's say in a few words, there is a full of infrastructures from the legal point of view, technology in place, and all the ecosystem available to allow you to basically perform any kind of transactions and managing your wealth as you want, from some security, from investing to normal venture capital, private debt, venture debt, and so forth.
Excellent. I have more questions on that, but obviously for my U.S. audience, which is a fair part of my audience, or those with a U.S. green card, our tax system is going to follow you everywhere. So you're not going to get the tax arbitrage that many other people around the world, ex the U.S. and maybe one or two other countries, would get. I'm going to assume in the coming decade, we're probably going to see countries, I think you hinted at it, that are going to start to look more like the US's tax system and punish you and really follow you all around the world and maybe not allow you to exit so easy. Now, I think even for a US citizen of wealth that has a family office, there's tremendous value for having multiple passports, banking, business relationships, satellite family offices, selectively offshore, and Luxembourg has for many years been one of my core choices. I did mention two other countries. One would probably be a little more for lifestyle. That would be New Zealand. But one is intriguing, maybe more so for Asian families, and that would be Singapore. Any specific comments about either of those?
No, certainly Singapore is one that also we've seen, and we have also a relationship because of part of structuring investments on that part of the area. Have a tail through Singapore. In the past, it was very popular Hong Kong, but due to the change also about the legally point of view, things becomes more, I would say, risky. So things was reorganized and moved to Singapore. Many family offices we are seeing so far. So it's definitely Singapore play a very important role in that part of Asia. New Zealand, I don't think that is. Yes, I know especially from a estate planning point of view, they have interesting structures as a trust, and I was using in the past in another role that I had for as international tax structure, and we use a combination also with Canadian structures and New Zealand. It's very popular for private bank in the past, but yes, I would say in terms of developments of the financial sector, I would say Singapore is one also that I confirm that we are dealing with as well.
Singapore could be very attractive. You are only allowed, if it goes the passport route, to have just one, and that would be Singapore. That's one drawback. Your children, military service. I could argue proximity to China. Singapore is not going to be a powerhouse militarily. So there could be some challenges there. Again, we have to weigh the advantages and the disadvantages. New Zealand is so beautiful and has many advantages as well, somewhat neutral, a little bit like Switzerland, and a little bit out of the way, which is why a lot of the big families and bunkers. But I don't want to get too bogged down in that. I do have to go back to what you said earlier about the UAE, Dubai, etc. Yes, incredible from a tax perspective. UK families of great wealth appear to love it. There are advantages with some talented people there. Summers are wickedly hot, but you know the direction that I have to head. Safety, safety, safety. And then the last couple of days, well, has that been rocked? I don't know what to believe, what not to believe, but it does appear like there have been some damages to the airport and travel. And there's a war, at least earlier stage, obviously raging in the Middle East. How safe is the United Arab Emirates, and has it took a very big hit in the last couple of days?
Yes, I must say that by coincidence, one of my partners in one business was there, and I was asking him about how was the panic. So I was calling him and say what's going on there, and also I'm working with a couple of family office based in Abu Dhabi for their venture capital arm based here in Luxembourg. So there was actually 2 days ago we had also a discussion. I think that general's feelings is about Dubai is not safe as they believe, but still, I would say some where the last minute they came into, they are the most concerned. The one that were there for longer time, they don't see. They see this kind of singular episode that will not make them, change in their view of staying there. Some that move in the last, I would say, 4 years, instead they are the most concerned, and they are considering other options to have a plan B or plan C in the short term.
And let's turn our attention a little back to Europe and broadly to the West and put a little bit of a negative eye in at least parts of it. We're seeing more and more capital controls, restrictions on banking withdrawals, mainly in Spain. But a lot of the countries are going through grave challenges in Europe and broadly in the West. I'm not saying that we don't have our problems here in the US. It's a pretty long list, I do understand. But when there's conversations around over-regulation, around capital controls, and let's just be honest, David, I'm putting you a little on the spot, I understand. Socialism is very much not only on the rise, it's basically there in much of Europe. And what I see happening in Spain hurts me. Therefore, I know each country in Europe is different, and stop lumping European to mean every country. So you could punish me for that. It's okay. You could yell. But some of the countries I mentioned, including Spain, why would I want to have businesses banking there? There seems to be so many grave challenges that it's going in a negative direction from my perspective.
Well, there are different factors. I think first of all, now I don't like to speak about politics, never, and I never make any post about politics. But this is something that is just like mathematics. So it's undisputable fact that there is a sort of lack of leadership in Europe, and compared to how it was probably 20, 30 years ago. So there is a sort of crisis, and every country try to find their way to compete, to survive, because you look about the debt, look about GDP. So growth is limited, resources due to this war and this kind of, let's say, dynamic change that is it is progressing. They were rushing into, for example, just to give an example, into alternative, so a source of energy. But then they realized that you cannot achieve this very fast. So dreaming about changing very fast and to forget about the dependence from oil, that was just a dream. And even a manufacturing company about mobile sectors, they realized and they shut down declarations. They said we would only move into electric, and they said now electric. There is a lot of cars storage in the logistics side that are unsold because incentive is not there anymore. So, and even before that, we have an example. Myself, when I was, for example, working the whole time in Deutsche Bank, we see some transactions about bond issuance that were for financing renewable energy, like windmill, like photovoltaic energy. This kind of financing was successful only because the German government, by the time Merkel, was providing subsidies for this type of energy. When the subsidies finish, because the government cannot subsidize all the time and specific energy, so then the business collapsed because it was not able to produce the energy from the nature that they would expect. So as domino effect, even the financing, so in this case it was a bond linked to the financing of the project, collapsed. So the investors will even lose the money, and investors meaning also retail investors. So just to say about this kind of dreams about transforming very fast. There was already some tests before that it's happened. So going back to your question, every country in Europe are struggling in order to find their way to succeed in terms of in making their own mathematics from the balance sheet point of view. So you see countries, as you mentioned before, Germany, France, but also Italy, they have a heavy taxations. Germany, they have less, but they were pushing a lot on the renewables. And then they end up that they had to stop the subsidize the renewables. And they see also the renewable is very fragile because last summer it's happened that something went wrong in terms of technology, and then all the system collapsed for many regions, even up to the border with France. So meaning that they were without electricity, and there was a lot of issue related to that. So even there was a EU inquiry about that. So just to say, I think and Spain was one the country that moved very fast into renewable energy, probably too much. So every country that are struggling with their own financial situations, and that's why now they're trying to change, and also we are increasing about from the political point of view. People are upset because of the high tax pressure, and so you see countries where the right side becomes more trendy at the moment, or some country the left side. So extremist is becoming, increasing in terms of politics inside the European Union.
I mean, we could spend hours on that. We won't.
Yeah.
The challenges of population, of cultural, of immigration, of the rise of AI, of over-regulation in Europe, of the rise of socialism. Taxation, as you know, also means entrepreneurs, go-getters, for the most part, especially once they get it, are going to be looking at other opportunities to get tax arbitrage. They're taking their intelligence, their companies, what they employ, what they do, the money they spend to different countries. That can't have a good net result long term. But it's more complicated than the simplification that I made it in my 30-second comment. But I just wanted to counter a little bit and bring up from my original question and your comments. We did promise the audience we have several things we'd like to get to. One of the most important, and we're both giving up a little bit of our internal secrets of our advice to significant families and family offices. And I can make the point that maybe these are industries that are going to be upended by the new world order of AI and the rise of crypto. We'll see how much time we have to get into that. But historically, it's been intriguing for families to own, and percentage of ownership we could discuss, and control, if nothing else, insight into banking and insurance infrastructure, more than just simply using it. At a scale and structure, does the transition from, is this a fantasy or a viable strategy for families of wealth to be involved in controlling of banks? I could also say insurers. Does country matter? So I'm throwing a lot at you. Maybe let's not get overly technical, but from a surface level, why do the very rich desire to own and control banks and insurance companies?
It becomes a kind of viable when you stop thinking of it as a vanity project and start to thinking as a governance tool. In Europe, this often means, as you said, captive insurance companies, specialized credit vehicles, and also, of course, buying a family bank. Although this had to be framed. I will give an example later. You need sufficient scale, regulatory literacy, and willingness to live with supervision and reporting. You trade simplicity for structural control. Done right, you move from being just another client to being a participant in financial plumbing, with some influence over how rules are applied to you. This is, I think, could a bit summarize, but to go more into details, you need to have really a clear picture, because there are many that we see cases that improvise from, I don't know, real estate or other businesses into become owners of banks and running banks, and they were not successful at all. Actually, they collapsed completely in that
Exactly.
sense. And an example, I can give the example of Haviland Bank. Haviland Bank was bought, was Kaupthing Bank, an Iceland bank that was put in resolutions and restructured from bankruptcy due to the financial crisis, during the credit crunch, basically, in 2009. And it was bought by a family, a UK family, that then turned around and put together a sort of multi-family bank. And then this bank went too far in terms of expansion, but also in terms of, I would say, business activities. Then it was a kind of way that ended up to collapse the bank and engage also in illegal transactions against sovereign with the Qatar, in this case, public information, and this make the bank to the Luxembourg bank, central bank to withdraw the license and to lose basically the bank, and not only Liechtenstein but all Monaco and Luxembourg and so forth, where the Luxembourg was the headquarters. So going back to own a family had to be done with with clear visions, and to focus on with the clear missions, then rather than to pretend to play a role that commercial bank or universal bank are doing. So that's is key.
Well, there's lots of complexities there. I did about a 2-hour interview 2 years ago with Martin Michaels, a prominent attorney in Switzerland, relative to a very deep dive into the nuances of buying banks. And this is a thing that the very rich, billionaires and up, seem to like to keep a little under wraps. That intrigued me. I agree it's a tough business. I agree there's grave challenges. A lot of them are not doing it per se to make money as a great investment. It's their ears to the grindstone of the Bank of International Settlements, what people want in terms of lending. It's arguably, depending on the banks and institutions and security, a level of custodial control over assets and some physical assets like gold. There's a variety of reasons, arguably tax arbitrage, a little harder for US citizens. But also, like you said, it's no guarantee it's going to be successful. Surprisingly, there's lots of banks for sale. When I last checked in Switzerland, maybe it was 27. A lot of them are small. A lot of them are antiquated. I'd like for you to get to that in a second. And they're going to need also recapitalization, meaning not just the 20, 30, $40 million to buy a tiny bank. You got to get approved. You got to have local people and resources. You got to recapitalize. You got to probably rebuild up the internal infrastructure. This may very well be an investment of USD, $100 million or more. What are you seeing in Liechtenstein? How many banks are for sale? And are more very wealthy Americans taking somewhat of a controlling interest?
Yeah, actually, what you say is totally correct. And I was discussing basically last week with a family that want to take over one of these banks for exactly what you mentioned, around roughly between 25, 30 millions. But then, of course, you need to recapitalize the bank. We had the same example, exactly about 120. And they are basically making a sort of capital raising now with different families to be part of this through a sort of foundations. By the way, with Dubai and the picture, just to complete the picture. But it was an interesting case. That's why I want to mention. Yes, there are this old style bank which are struggling for survival. In terms of competition, is very tight in terms of the role, old models about managing a portfolio manager, wealth management. And to be competitive, you need to invest money into infrastructure, meaning IT platforms, and to offer innovative products, and even the digitalizations of the platform. Because, for example, there is an increasing demand, and Luxembourg is one of the, again, jurisdiction that set him one of the most interesting one in terms of creating a lot of legal framework for digital assets and in terms of blockchain and crypto. Although I remember 2018 and 2019, I was asking, a client asking me about in Luxembourg and say, no, we cannot even create a fund that they would invest into crypto because it's not a welcome jurisdiction. Then, of course, government change and also complete everything changed. Now we have all the biggest player platform here related to the custody of digital assets. So all the models of the bank doesn't have this. And what is in the process is a sort of revamping or basically repositioning of old banks into a tech bank, so a small tech bank. So that is the key because living with a basis point of your trade and of security or allocation of portfolio is become tough and too much competitions. And if the bank doesn't have a sort of volume of asset under management, the cost will not be. Some of them are just break even, some are even loss making. So just to mention, and if the one they are profitable, the margin is very. It's not significant. So. As in terms of business, so that's why, as you mentioned, there is several banks for sale in Liechtenstein, but Liechtenstein is not many because it's a small country. It's a small city actually, rather than country, and Switzerland as well. So here, for example, in Luxembourg, there is not this kind of shopping you can do as in the past. There are a few banks for sale, but the price ticket is quite high compared to what you mentioned before.
I mean, there's so many other complexities. They're not going to want you to buy and take over a bank if you don't have banking experience. You're probably going to have to hire and bring on, probably as a co-investor, someone locally who has banking experience. You're going to have to hire local people. So there's a lot of complexities here. Now, we won't get a little too deep into, even though it may not always be a great investment, I did mention other reasons. Your ear to what's going on, connections to, I could state, the Bank of International Settlements, to the fact that capital and custodial relationships and your resources, depending on your level of control, percentage of ownership, and structure, and this is where you need a world-class attorney, could protect you from some level of your residence country putting you under attack and looking to freeze your assets and resources. These are among the reasons why, David, my words, not yours, why some people look for the value of a level of control in a relationship in banks that are often billionaires. So a little bit of insight to some of you. I'm not as fluid in insurance companies. I think they're intriguing. It worked pretty well for Warren Buffett. There's tax advantages. Do you have any specific opinion or things you're seeing in European or international families, similarly to what I mentioned with banks, with insurers, maybe not as much captive, but actual insurance and reinsurance companies?
Yes, I mean, insurance is one of the few vehicles that can hold a long duration capital with legal segregation from the operating world, favorable tax treatment in many regimes, and built in estate planning logic. Most families treat insurance as a product, something is sold to them instead of a chassis, kind of, let's say, chassis on which you can build a custom structure for successions, privacy, and resilience. Investors obsess over yield, and on one side, and architects obsess over the legal box that yield sits in, and that box often matter more in a crisis. So is it good to segregate, to allocate a toolbox for successions? Luxembourg basically was one of the strongest jurisdictions that life settlements insurance was one of the most sold products in wealth management. And especially also with some when you also for marriage principle for some very wealthy family also, but preservation from some framework that work well in some jurisdictions. So to be careful to marry in Italy, some other jurisdictions, but Berlusconi is an example, but there are many others. In order to avoid to pay a very high breakup. Basically amount of the wealth. But yes, I would say it was very trendy as a product, especially, let's say, 15 years ago until 10 years ago, because tax was one of the most trigger into that. Then a regulation, different country changed, also in Europe. So it's still used, but more for succession planning, rather than so avoid succession tax to some extent, rather than use as a box for wealth management, because there are many other tools there that are more advantageous in terms of tax, in terms of feasibility, in terms of governance.
And yes, I mean, there were some broad questions that came in. It will definitely need a part two, as well as other specialized guests that I'll have on. But yes, Jack, it gets complex. Even as a U.S. family, I need an onshore and an offshore plan. I need to set up likely some dynastic trust. I look at South Dakota. Even coming in internationally, I'll look at certain structures, South Dakota, maybe Alaska, Nevada. I would definitely set up a private trust company. I would have offshore strategies. I would have various foundations, LLCs and corporations in various locations. I could argue Nevis, Cook Islands. Luxembourg is going to be very intriguing to me from a secondary, tertiary, single family office perspective, and access to certain investments that maybe strictly as a U.S. entity I would not be able to get. And just because I know trust and structures in various countries or jurisdictions doesn't mean my actual assets are in those. I can't give you an easy answer in 60 seconds. It is complex. And this is part of the puzzle and the dialogue that we're having today. A little bit maybe easier, David. 2008 proved, and you mentioned the word liquidity, that in a liquidity crisis, near all correlations kind of go to one. How do you look in today's world? And again, things are changing rapidly, at genuinely on correlation in a portfolio, given your global experience, your experience in various asset classes. Is it only gold? Is it Bitcoin? Is it owning commodities? What are you doing to hedge certain risk relative and having on correlations in your portfolio?
But I think that is extremely important, and holding a modest allocation of physical precious metals under your control in jurisdictions you trust is not a prediction of collapse, but is an insurance against systemic interruptions. You are not betting that the world ends. You are acknowledging that wires can be blocked, markets can shut, and the legal dispute can drag on. In such moments, a small pool of universally recognized value that is not a claim on anyone else's balance sheet can reduce panic and buy you time. The paranoia is not in holding it, but the paranoia is in assuming that the highly intermediated, highly digital system will always function smoothly. So, if you treat instead Bitcoin as ideology or speculation, you create a drama. If you treat it as one tool for confiscations resistance, you can design calmly. That means professional cold storage, multi-signature scheme where no single person can unilaterally move funds, and carefully design inheritance protocols so that the keys are neither lost nor easily abused. Governance is everything. You need policies for who can sign, under what circumstances, how disputes are resolved, and how changes are authorized. Without that, Bitcoin becomes less an edge against state risk and more a source of intra-family risk. So this is a bit, in a nutshell, what I'm seeing.
Good points. We'll maybe do a little deeper dives in the time we have into certain aspects of that and other things we need to cover. Many of you noted that Ray Dalio, I did see it, was on an element of the All In podcast with David Friedberg. I thought David could have done a better job of pushing back on Ray. Ray did make some good points, and he was wrong on a fair amount of it. I am going to have some at my Palm Beach program. We're going to cover that, but I'm going to have some special guests on in the next month relative discussing. I haven't done as much on Bitcoin and crypto lately, and I got like the coolest guest ever on Web3 coming up next week. I believe it's Thursday at 11 o'clock. So stay tuned. I used to be really deep in that. I haven't covered it as much relatively recently, but that's going to change beginning next week and things to come. So back a little bit to direct ownership of things like gold and silver and commodities. Gold is relatively straightforward. We could argue in or out of the banking system, but certain other commodities like copper and others, like how much could I physically hold? Where am I going to hold it? And does that become a risk, either of the government simply taking it or being an attack vector? So when it comes to physical resources, mainly debatably precious metals, how do you see wealthy families diversifying their risk of direct physical own or holding it? It kind of becomes a bearer asset. Whoever grabs it and takes it, it's kind of theirs.
Well, it's, I mean, as I said, it's good to allocate, to have an allocations, but to struggling with, going to different kind of asset classes physically. I mean, if you stay with gold, it's one thing, but then if you move to other class, I think it becomes a nightmare for the processing and managing. Then we can argue about also the trading and the circumstances. I think it doesn't make any sense because there would be more involved cost to handle rather than really it's a sort of protection that they are looking at solutions.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of families are going to have financial instruments that are like, I got a piece of paper that says I have a stake in something, but do I really have the underlying commodity? And do I know what might be what rehypothecation? I always mispronounce that. Like, if you want to be a serious family globally on these issues, you do need to think them through. You need to have physical ownership. It needs to be diverse. And yes, it does complicate your life and things could go wrong. Uh, how about things that you see from around the world of families of wealth owning what I would call productive land, water rights, farmland, forestry, energy production, kind of substrates of civilization? And maybe we'll stick a little bit to Europe specifically. How are you seeing wealthy families going about owning and controlling what I described in terms of those assets?
Well, in Europe, you really just buy land outright at scale without entangling yourself in layers of history, regulations, and politics. You typically assess these assets via partnerships with existing operators, long-term leases, or structured vehicles that respect local legal norms and the community interest on the other side. You need fluency in, for example, in agricultural policy, environmental rules, and sometimes local patronage networks. This also helps a lot. In some cases, I've seen. Otherwise, you may own something on paper that is effectively unusable because, yes, they told you that you can do that, but then at the end, you can't do it. So the goal is exposure to subtracted like food, water, timber, energy, without walking into unwinnable political or regulatory fight.
Let's turn our attention a little bit to another sector that you do have experiences in. VC, venture capital. The model was built around a specific set of assumptions about liquidity, exit windows, market efficiency. Which of those assumptions is AI actively kind of destroying? And what is venture capital going to look like coming out on if there is another side?
AI shorten the distance between inventions and misuse. A tool appears and very quickly states a tool sometimes it's also used by the way, states and criminals and competitors learn to weaponizing it. So as an investor, you can't rely on long periods of safe alpha where others are slow to catch up. You have to assume convergence is fast. That means underwriting has to consider not just product market fit, but also weaponization's risk. How easily can this technology be turned against your own interests or destabilize the environment in which you operate? Monitoring shifts from periodic board updates to continuous surveillance of technical, regulatory, and geopolitical signals. I would say the classic VC model assumes semi-predictable exit windows that markets will reward growth with liquidity at roughly the right times. AI operates in a world where macro and regulatory shocks can freeze IPOs, where incumbent can copy futures rapidly. So the assumptions that the time naturally works in your favor, if you just wait for the next cycle, it's breaking. Liquidity windows are less reliable, and exit timing becomes more path dependent and political. VC and the other side of this will need to be more opportunistic on liquidity and less dogmatic about the 10 years fund or the G curve than harvest narrative.
Most family offices are approaching AI as an investment theme, but others seem to look at it's approaching as an operational threat. What I mean by that, does AI-enabled sovereign risk look like financial surveillance, central bank digital currency control, automated enforcement, and how far along is all that?
Yeah, it gives states the ability to monitor fiscal behavior in near real time, especially when combined with digital payments and experimentations around CBDC. By the way, I was today in a digital forums here in Luxembourg organized by the Luxembourg Financial Associations. And there is more than rumors that the European Central Bank will come out with a digital currency probably by the end of the year or the beginning of next year. Compliance enforcement becomes programmable. Rules can change overnight. An automated system can flag, freeze, or slow transactions without human intervention. The efficiency of the state apparatus increase, which is good for fighting crime, but also means that capital demand not compliance can be constrained faster and more precisely. This doesn't mean inevitably dystopia, but it does mean that relying on obscurity or complexity as a shield is increasingly naive. So the two sides of the metals.
David, I believe you have said, pardon me if I'm wrong, it still is a good question, that capital is mobile, but connections are not. That families who survive civilizational transitions are those with relationships across geographies, industries, and power structures. In other words, the importance of a network, a global network, communication, connectivity, beyond simply, I could argue, money and liquidity. Control and power and connections are a form of wealth as well. How do you think this will evolve moving forward?
Relationship. Cultivating a relation across border industry and generations, which operators, policymakers, and thinkers, and others are obvious transactional benefit. You invest time in being useful to them and sharing information, co-investing prudently, hosting and connecting others. When a crisis comes, it is the pre-existing web of trust that moves resources, not the Rolodex you build in the middle of the fire. So I think the shift happens when, for example, in my view, it's about where I see opportunity thanks to the network that I build, and this is having intangible value more than can be factors in the wealth as well, I would say.
Interesting. And maybe wrapping it up and beginning to, we spoke earlier and we began that sovereign risk, things go wrong. What worked today may not work tomorrow, and understanding the history of families that have lasted often centuries, which in your backyard, there are some. And how would you conclude in a world that is moving very rapidly, where, again, we mentioned AI, increasing surveillance, more and more countries with nuclear power, wars, threat. There were always wars. They were always bloody and violent. Just they could become far more dangerous now with the weaponry and resources that we have at our fingertips. How do I maintain residency and citizenship? And if you had to pick, it's not an easy question, and it may get you in trouble with countries you don't pick. If you maybe had to pick 3 countries that a family of wealth should have residency, debatably citizenship, banking, and relationships, what countries would they be?
I don't want to, promoting my jurisdiction, but certainly I would say Luxembourg is the most safe country in Europe where you can put your money in terms of banking. In terms of country risk, stability. So Probably EU membership. I mean, passport is useful for sure. Then one way to escape also Middle East, although we see these days that I know it can be troublesome sometimes, but if you are keen to pay for that, and probably then the debate is from us European maybe look at US, and from US maybe looking to Asia. That's another way to think about. I think also some people, when there was some, who say, wrong, let's say, some people were too much afraid about potential nuclear war exposure, and some people were considering to buy real estate property pretty far from where the big centers of explosion would be. So some people were reasoning also in that way. And by the way, in Switzerland, there was a sales of special bunkers inside some mountains on the rocks, where they built this kind of sort of facility, quite expensive. We're talking about minimum price was 50-60 million euro, Swiss franc, for this kind of assets, build nuclear protection score, something like that. There was also this kind of trend. Some people were thinking about measure about the impact about the nuclear, and look about, for example, Uruguay, like Punta del Este, be a nice place and safe to have to fly over with private jet when the time get worse, and before the time gets worse. But you never know when it's just speculations that some I heard from some families, maybe also jokes, provocation to some extent, because when this kind of issue, like we saw last week, where people never expected Dubai would be on the radar to get the bomb. First of all, it's a Arabic country. Secondly, it's quietly in place and so forth. And and there was bombing coming to a Fairmont hotel. So you cannot predict the future to some extent, but you just need to read the sign, as we said before.
And in the comments, Charles Finney, you're always so bright and so intelligent. Maybe more comments than questions, but I do appreciate you and learn from you. All good. Thank you. Yeah, David, like that was like incredible. Like there's so many, like you said, from what you mentioned in Luxembourg, the US, Iceland, and New Zealand for a little bit of isolation, Singapore as broadly a hub in quote unquote Asia, probably currently, but it changes so much in LATAM, Uruguay, living in Italy, but maybe northern Italy, being close to Switzerland if you had to get there quick. There is no one perfect answer. Also, we don't know what the next 20, 30 years are going to hold, let alone here on Earth, but in space, on the moon, in Mars. So that is absolutely, not to get too Star Trekian on you, the next frontier. I could also make the point on AI and consciousness and singularity and simulations. Like these are, man, if we could live 10 more years, what interesting times, assuming we even make it, might be ahead of us in my work on the future of the family office and what that may look like and the purpose of family. I have thoughts one day and I wake up and they feel differently the next. I have always more questions than answers. David, I really appreciate you. For those that would like to learn more about you, follow you, or reach out, how could they become more familiar with your work?
Well, they can contact me on LinkedIn, but of course, my email is david@quarantia.lu. So for any questions, feel free to reach me, and we'll be more than glad.
Excellent. And everyone, that's David Moscato, Moscato. I was so happy to be introduced to David. I believe he's on LinkedIn and some of the platforms. Again, have an opportunity to do your diligence, reach out and learn more. But thinking about things from a perspective in Europe, but then having a global perspective, it's always good. You never have enough smart people. And again, agree that Luxembourg is a very intriguing destination that maybe the next time we could solely focus on that, like I did a year ago. and do a very, very deep dive. Everyone, I'm Angelo Robles. I do love these discussions on a little bit of geopolitics, sovereign risk, mitigating and hedging risk, and how AI and enhancingly increased surveillance. David mentioned central bank digital currencies. They're coming, whether it's programmable and the government could shut the spigot and shut you off if they don't like what you're doing. Hopefully, that's what we're going to be fighting for with our personal liberties and freedoms here in the US. But I'm just one person. We shall see how that shall play out. Family offices, be very aware of these issues. They're very important. Follow me across social medias, mainly at Family Office on YouTube, very active on LinkedIn, and go to angelorobles.com and learn more, including for those that would love to be a member and value our proprietary content and programming, including upcoming in a week and a half, beginning the week of March 16th, my 4 days in Palm Beach with plenty of our members and incredible thought leaders, including on some of the subjects that we covered today, and multiple families joining us from Europe. I appreciate all of you. Thank you all so much. And David, again, thanks for being a great guest. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Thank you.